Okay, here we are. This is episode number 6.5, continuing episode number 6, where we looked into the first of two sequence motives in that passage from Bruckner's 8. And we saw that that first phrase is based pretty consistently on the circle of major thirds. So just as it would on the circle of fifths, we're going away from a tonic by the key interval. The circle of fifths would be the fifth, but here we're the major third. So we're going away by major third, and then we're going to return to the tonic by major third also. The interesting thing that emerges from that is the progression in the middle. We spent some time trying to understand or reconcile that progression within functional harmony, and we saw how hard it is to reconcile it. So we introduced the Tonnetz and the analytical techniques associated with the Tonnetz, what's called Riemannian and neo-Riemannian analysis, and we had a look from that point of view. So we saw how that key progression is a compound transformation within the Tonnetz. It's made up of three single steps, three basic transformations that when put together build up a compound transformation known as the hexatonic pole transformation. So that was the most interesting thing in that phrase, the emergence of that H transformation from the functioning of the circle of major thirds. So in the end, the first phrase of that passage reduces to an L transformation followed by an H transformation followed by another L transformation going back to the original tonic. And that's where we are. The last iteration of that sequence ends on the chord of E major, and then Bruckner introduces the second note. Okay, by the way, the chord of E major that I mentioned is spelled in the score as F flat. And then what follows, well, that's not a triad, but clearly that G flat is just an ornament of the F flat. So what we have really is this progression. D flat minor going to its dominant, A flat. Okay, so how do we go from that F flat to D flat minor? Oh, it's right here. Yeah, of course, it's hard to see with the flats, but if you think of it as E major and then C sharp minor, then it's more clear that the relative triad. So E major, the relative, is the C sharp minor triad. So that's the R transformation for relative. In tonal terms, we can still see that this is just 1 going to 6, and then that 6 gets tonicized and we get its dominant, and we're on to the next phrase. In the Tonnetz, as I just said, this is an R, and the progression that follows goes to that chord. And this is actually also a predefined compound transformation. When a minor chord goes to its dominant, in the Tonnetz you could do that by going P, L, R, or by going R, L, P. Either way, they are defined as what's called the near fifth transformation, N for short. It's tempting to see the N transformation as 1, minor 1 going to 5, but as I was mentioning last time, well, that's kind of not the point of this neo-Riemannian analysis. We're trying to walk away from the concepts of functional harmony, so from dominant. And on the other hand, the N transformation is not tonic going to dominant in major mode, for example. So sure, it's easy to think of it as minor 1 going to 5, but just remember that's not how it should be conceptualized. In any case, this still makes sense within functional harmony. Maybe we're back to circle fifths progressions, so we'll see what happens. This is the motive that gets sequenced a couple of times at a couple of different pitch levels in the next phrase. Okay, let me look here in detail at the score. So yeah, this is not exactly the same realization of a motive. I was looking for that second at the beginning of a motive, but we don't have it here. It still sounds like the same motive. It's kind of like the same character in the play, but the exact realization is different. We don't have that first ornamentation. We just have the chord of E minor, and then there's that passing tone in the tuba that makes that chord into a chord of C major. So we still have that basic skeleton of a minor chord going to its dominant, This time the ornamentation is not a dissonance at the beginning, but a passing tone in the tuba. So before anything else, let's have a quick look at the next iterations of the motive, just to make sure that there isn't another detail there sneaking in and changing things. So no, harmonically, the motive does not change anymore. It's always that version with the passing tone in the tuba, except that the last one does not have the passing tone. So clearly the motive is just that minor chord with the dotted rhythms and so on going to its dominant. The rest is just superficial ornamentations. On the other hand, let's mark the point where the sequence starts happening twice as fast. That is, perceptually, that is a very important detail. We shouldn't just ignore it. So this is where that happens, and this is the general progression in that sequence. So let's see, we had ended at that chord of G sharp major, functioning as dominant of C sharp, and then the next iteration starts in the chord of E minor. So yeah, I don't think this is going to be functional. E minor is no kind of resolution to G sharp major. Let's see what happens in the Tonnetz. Where is E minor? We're here on G sharp major. E minor is down there, so we need P, L, P. Oh, okay, so PLP is H. It's that same hexatonic pole transformation that we had seen in the first phrase that arises from using the circle of major thirds. So here we see it again. So we had seen within the motive we had an N transformation, and then we have an H into the next iteration of the motive. That next iteration will be another N, as we know, and then what happens? Another H. Okay, so this seems to be the cycle that we're following. Let me go through the whole progression and mark the transformations that are happening. So it tends to get pretty messy in the Tonnetz with all the arrows and all that. But here we have the summary, very clear summary. There's a clear NH cycle. So N within the motive and then H in between iterations of the motive. Except for that one time, where instead of an H we get an R, that actually coincides with the point where the sequence goes twice as fast. That's interesting. If the music had continued with the cycle with an H, we would have encountered D flat minor. But with the R, we go to a D. And then the cycle resumes one more time through an H, finally getting to the iteration in F that ends in the chord of C major. Here there is a little fact that I haven't mentioned before. The symphony is in C. It's actually C minor, but I don't think that it's a coincidence that we're ending this whole passage with a chord of C. That small irregularity there helps him get to C. And in that sense, I don't think it's a coincidence that it happens at the point where there's also a rhythmic change. So there's those large-scale formal considerations also at play here. Okay, so let me clean this up a little bit. I want to have a look at what happens when we follow the journey of this sequence through the Tonnetz. But not in every detail as we have so far, but kind of at a higher level by taking the full motive as a unit. And I would say the important thing in the motive is the chord where it ends. So that's a long note. Everything kind of seems to lead to that note. So I'm going to take each of the ending chords of the motive and follow what happens with the Tonnetz. So in fact we had the one from before, so the E major, that F flat / E major chord that ended the previous motive, that will be our starting point. And then the next step in the journey is this G sharp chord, actually spelled as A flat, but whatever. And then this one and this one. And here we can see more directly what I was talking about. So Bruckner had ended the previous phrase in a chord of E. He needs to get back to C somehow, and this is the path that he's following. Importantly, that path uses the H transformation, that key progression that he had developed from the circle of major thirds. But the big picture is that we're on a path to C. And then once he gets to that C, then he repeats it. He really gives it a couple more emphasis. So yeah, very much making reference to that motive, but if you watched carefully, that's not exactly the same motive. So we're not doing F going back to C, F going back to C. This time there is the D flat. That D flat that would have been the passing tone in the tuba, that was kind of shortchanged. It didn't happen that first time we got to C. Well, now it is happening as a full chord on its own. And then it happens once, and then it happens again, but this time the jump in the first trombone is higher. That actually creates a chord of D flat. Oh wow, this is amazing. So we have D flat, one semitone over C, and the first trombone has B natural, semitone under C. This is a German chord. This is the two notes pointing to the C. And this confirms so many things. First of all, it confirms that C is an important formal point. He's making all kinds of emphasis to it. Second of all, well, a German chord is a dissonant chord. And this makes me realize that so far, throughout this whole passage, last episode and this episode, there hasn't been another dissonant chord. It's all been just minor and major triads. This key moment is the one that introduces an actual harmonic dissonance, which kind of goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning, that there is a simplification in the language towards the end of the 19th century. This is what I mean. The harmony of the whole passage is very interesting and very convoluted, and there's a reference to a lot of things, but the vocabulary itself is very simple. This is called Pantriadicism. Rather than being built on dissonance and resolution, at some point tonal music starts being built on just going from triad to triad. And this is why the Tonnetz is so great at analyzing this music, because the Tonnetz is also made only of minor and major triads. In fact, one of the problems of the theory is how to deal with non-consonant chords. But when we have music like this, just triads all over the place with a flexibility and a freedom to go to one another, then the Tonnetz and Riemannian and neo-Riemannian analysis are just the thing. So again, I'm very interested in hearing what you thought of neo-Riemannian analysis, whether you knew it before, whether it interests you. So leave a comment down there. Let me know if I missed anything that I should have mentioned. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Like the video, share it, it all helps. So I'll see you next time. We'll see what the next episode is. So I haven't decided yet, but so if you have an idea or a vote, just also put it in the comments. Thanks so much, and I'll see you at our next first sight analysis.